Hello, this is the goddess, Kaya Kuan Yin. Thank you for joining me on my second webinar for the Goddess channel. Today, we are going to be talking about a great topic that's near to my genitals, literally. And it is how to protect yourself against herpes stigma from other people. So this is for people who have something, and it's to protect yourself against other people's ignorance. Because honestly, the comments and some of the stuff that I've had to deal with from other people's reactions and their fears have actually been more painful to me than the herpes, the cold sores themselves. So I've been out as being HSV oral herpes positive for a good 5 years now. And I kept it in the closet for a year, and I didn't tell anyone. I worked as an escort at that time, and I didn't tell anyone. It was in the closet. I had an emotionally abusive partner who would really make me feel bad for working while I was not, disclosing to people that I had herpes. And so then I, all of a sudden, went to New York City, and I went to this open mic, and I just read a coming out story, and it was part of Audacia Ray's wonderful happy ending open mic series for sex work readers and writers, and it was great. So since then, I've been blogging about being out and about being herpes positive, and I put it in my OkCupid profile. And I'm pretty out about it as possible, yet that doesn't mean that I feel comfortable talking to every single person that I'm with about it at all times, nor do I feel that I have the responsibility to educate everybody that wants to have sex with me, nor do I feel that is my responsibility to show any incriminating evidence about my herpes status to potential clients, nor do I feel like it's necessary. If you didn't read my website or if you didn't ask me about it, do I need to bring it up? And I do not feel like it is some sort of immoral obligation of mine to keep you safe. And lastly, as a love and sex worker who's been in the industry for 15 years, I don't give refunds because of something that you had thought would be a risk. Because I feel that there's many activities that we can do that do not put you at risk. And I never intended to, nor, I really feel like there is no guarantees in life, and that to demand that you want a refund because there's defective, there's something defective with this merchandise is really insulting to me. And I just don't support that paradigm. And so this webinar has to do with how to protect yourself against other people's ignorance, basically. Because I have been doing that as a sex worker for almost 15 years. But in 2009, I happened to have been part of this study that included a full panel of testing, including testing for herpes, which they usually don't do. So the thing about herpes is that people don't test for it everywhere. It's not in this, oh, I'm clean for everything STD panel that they give you. There's a lot of things that the basic STD panel doesn't tell you. And it's also not the most accurate HIV test that you could get in the county most often than not. But herpes, oral and genital, is something that the county does not test for because it's an expensive test. And the, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control's official stance on why they don't give free herpes testing, because if you're interested, you maybe slept with me and you're scared and you're like, oh, I need to get a herpes test. And I'm like, well, if you're not showing any signs, then they won't test you for free. You have to pay for it, and it's $60 to $100 to get tested for herpes in just private sort of LA clinics. If you're showing signs of a cold sore, then the county will test you for herpes, but only if you're already showing signs for it. Hello! So in a minute, I'm going to bring on a good friend of mine, and this person is an HIV positive activist and a performance artist from Toronto, Canada, and I first met him when I was invited to the lovely Saskatoon when my art career was like on the brink of success. I thought I was like really gonna be this big art star because I got invited to Canada to show my work. It was the best. And so along the way, I rented a car and I drove across several provinces. And I met Mikiki along the way. He's a performance artist and also works in HIV prevention. And so you can talk now. Tell us how you're doing and say hi.
Me?
Yes, talk.
Okay, I'd love to. So I'll give a little bit of a background about myself and why I feel like the goddess invited me to this space. So I have been doing sexual and reproductive health education for almost 20 years as an activist and as a social service worker. And I've also been living with HIV for about 8 years. And I started off doing sexual and reproductive health education in the high school system in Calgary, which is a city in the Western Prairies in Canada. And then lived throughout a bunch of other provinces in Canada doing gay men's health work, mostly focusing on HIV. And then that work got focused more on people living with HIV, doing sexual and reproductive health promotion for people living with HIV. And a lot of that work is around dealing with HIV stigma and trying to unpack and understand what HIV stigma is and where it comes from and how to respond to it. And as someone living with HIV, that was a really important piece of my own journey. And one of the things that we wanted to do with the last job that I had before my current position was bringing people living with HIV into an outreach context where people would talk about living with HIV as sexual health educators. And I feel like that was, spoiler alert, like a really great way to help do some anti-stigma work as well. So I'm really hoping that today we'll be able to maybe draw some parallels and maybe find some contrasts between how some of the work that we've been doing in HIV stigma can help reduce herpes stigma.
So I would say that you're totally cutting edge, Mikiki, just with your art and also with the way that you do positive outreach. I've learned so much over the years from just having these conversations in your living room about disclosure, about living positive, about promiscuity, because you have like way more sex than I do, even when I was a full-time escort, you know. So I mean, the average gay man definitely has more sex than the average even sex working woman.
Yeah.
So
I'm pretty slutty for gay men as well.
It's just how it goes, especially the average rent boy if they're working too and you're polyamorous. It's just endless possibilities, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm not only more monoamorous, I'm, you know, like not even having intercourse from my sex work now. But even when I was, it was like not that many. I was like really trying to be selective. So I've learned a lot through vicariously hearing stories how people deal with their sex lives, because everybody's sex life is going to be different regardless of what you assume someone's sex life must be like because they are of this, you know, background or association. Yeah, so different similarities. I mean, I wonder if 1 in 10 men, I don't know what's, this is the statistic in San Francisco, 1 in 10 men in San Francisco are HIV positive. So the average like outreach prevention coordinator just passed out condoms at clubs, and it seems like you do a lot more than that. Like, what else do you think is important for people to know besides just wear a condom?
Absolutely. So the landscape around prevention for HIV has really shifted dramatically in the last 5 years. I would say in the last 10 years, we've had some really significant shifts. In 2008, there was a study, or there was a statement released, which is called the Swiss Statement, and it talked about a kind of meta-analysis or a study of a group of different studies, talking about how when people are on HIV treatment, that the level of virus in our system when we're on treatment that's effective decreases to the point that it makes it difficult to transmit HIV. And we've seen more and more evidence, and for folks that are interested, you can look up the HPTN 052 study or the KwaZulu-Natal study, or you can look up the IPREC study, or you could also look up the partner study, which is ongoing and supposed to be finished in 2017. And all of these studies indicate that it's not only difficult for people who are on effective HIV treatment to transmit HIV, but it's actually almost impossible. So they're saying they can't give a 0 transmission rate, but they're saying it's as close to 0 as a scientist is able to say, which is really, really
So that being said, you're like the first person that I'd ever heard that was having unprotected sex as a positive person.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And that was like a shocker to me. I was like, whoa, I'd always heard wear a condom, and wrap it up and be safe and stuff, but you're actually having raw sex with people. Yeah. Other HIV positive people, right? But then also other negative people too.
Yeah, so this is one of the really fascinating things about how the science has changed, and how, as a prevention worker and as an HIV activist, we have to think about that the scientific information has really shifted. What used to be wear a condom all the time, now we're recognizing that people are becoming acculturated, or like getting to know the scientific data as it's kind of filtering through the media, or filtering through like the health service organizations that we're accessing. So it's actually, we're now looking at it more as like there's a toolbox. So for people that are interested in staying HIV negative, there's like a toolbox that you can use to stay HIV negative and still have the kind of sex that you want. And for people who are living with HIV, there's a toolbox that we can use for preventing onward transmission of HIV. And one of those things is for positive people, is by taking HIV medication, which we know lowers viral load to undetect, or like the amount of virus in my system to like an undetectable level by the screening measurements. But also for people who are HIV negative, you can take an HIV medication once a day, and that actually builds a resistance to becoming HIV positive. So people are able to have condomless sex with like HIV negative people, and HIV positive people are able to have condomless sex. And you don't have to have both of those things in place. Like the negative person doesn't need to be taking the pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP as it's called, while the positive person is taking regular HIV meds. One or either of those would work. But when people are using both,
they don't need to double dose. Once one person is medicated, that's all that's required?
That's all that's needed.
Wow, that's great.
Totally.
Because
and the information
I have a friend who's on PrEP as a preventative method, and I just is like, I got off my herpes medication. This started giving me heart palpitations, like irregular heartbeat, and I don't have a significant other right now, so I'm not having unprotected regular sex with anybody right now. So I don't feel like I need to medicate, and for me, it's like to take a daily prescription if you're doing it as prevention is like, it's a lot on your body, I think. And this is becoming this normal trend for gay men to take PrEP.
So could I just also chime in about that? I think that while I think it's a really important, it's an important like scientific biomedical intervention, and it's important for people to have access to it, I also want us to think about what it means for us to buy into the pharmaceutical industry. And if we look at the history of like hormonal birth control methods, and the kind of ways that we have colonized or attempted to colonize women's bodies around like reproductive health, I think it's important for us to be careful and cautious when we're, like, do you actually need PrEP because you are having condomless sex with partners of HIV positive or unknown status? Or are you just worried about contracting HIV, but you're also maybe doing all the things that you need to do to prevent HIV transmission or prevent getting HIV? So I think like the idea of buying into PrEP is just like everyone should do it because it's the next big thing. I don't know that I fully agree with that. I think it's important for people to figure out for themselves, like, am I actually at risk of getting HIV? And if I am, and condoms don't work for me, then there's some other things that I can do. But I don't think that we should just, as a community, all dive in and start like paying hundreds and millions of thousands of dollars to pharmaceutical companies to take these medications that actually are not super great for our bodies. If we're taking, and there's, there's not a lot of research on like long-term effects of taking Truvada if you don't actually need it for HIV. So yeah, so just like a little bit of a caution, but while it's important, to have access to this tool. I think there's a lot of it's important to figure out if we actually need the tool.
Sorry about that. Let me see if I can find a mute button. Oh, there it goes. I'm sorry. No, I think the birth control pill is very similar in fashion for cis women, right? It's like I refuse to take the birth control pill. I'm not gonna do a daily pharmaceutical. So that's why it took me so long to get on a cyclovir. I did that primarily for my primary partner to feel safe. I would not want to pass herpes onto someone that did not, you know, he didn't have it. So, or he didn't know that he had it. So we were having unprotected fluid bonded sex, and I just would feel bad, you know, like. But he was, you know, your partners are all responsible for their own choices in their own bodies, and so. And coming into full realization of that, then this ability to release that decision to the partner and their body is huge. And that's something that I would coach people on, that it's really everybody's decision and responsibility. You know, even if my sub back there, like, falls down the stairs and breaks his neck, he's responsible for his own choices in his own body. Like, he did that in my house, but this is not like, it's like I gotta, you know, you're given a container, and then you're within that container responsible for your own actions.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a phrase that a lot of us sex educators use, and also kink players use, which is like, know your limits, play within it. Yeah, and I think that's a thing that I think brings really true to, or should bring really true to anybody that's sexually active. It's like, know your limits, not just in terms of like the kink scene that you want to participate in, or the you know, like the emotional dynamic you want to participate in, but also think about it in terms of like how that applies to your sexual health, and recognize that most people who are HIV positive and most people who are HSV positive might not even know that they're HIV positive. So if we're depending on people to disclose as a way for us to manage our sexual health, that's actually not the most it's not the most effective, and I would say not the most responsible in terms of like socially, in terms of the kinds of communities that we want to, or that I want us to be able to build.
Yeah, most people absolutely don't know about herpes. Herpes tests, like I said earlier, they're rare, and you have to show signs in order to get them. And then most people don't want to do that extra work to go to the clinic and get tested and sit in the hours, you know, to do that. But I wonder if there's so much main concern about HIV that you even care or ask further questions about other STDs when you're fucking someone. Do you do that? Or
that's a really good question. So I have a primary partner, but we are in an open context, and I also have other regular partners, and then I also hook up with people kind of randomly as well. With my regular partners, we have an ongoing dynamic where we have conversations about when we get tested, and I feel like most of them are also living with HIV and access regular healthcare. And I encourage all of the people that I know living with HIV, my friends and also my fuck buddies, that when you go get your regular blood work to monitor your HIV, you should also be going and getting a full STI screen as well, so that we're able to kind of manage our sexual health that way. Other things that I do around that is I try to limit the number of like group situations that I participate in, because then it's a more difficult situation, or like a more difficult context to be able to like, basically you just can't ask everybody at a like sex party, you know, like, when was the last time you were screened for STIs? You know, depending on the size of the party, but it often is a bit of a vibe killer.
Right.
You know? So with the people that I'm close with, I definitely have like an ongoing conversation about like when I was last tested, and, you know, like my like primary partner just called me yesterday and he was like, I had my regular screening, everything came back clear, just so that you know. You know, and when I go and get my blood work done, I let him know kind of what the results are as well. And I do that with my other sexual partners that are regular. And we all have had conversations about there is a distinct possibility, and actually like a likelihood, that we will occasionally get a sexually transmitted infection. And it's how we respond to that information that is an indication for me as to whether I want someone to share my bed with me again or not. You know, like if you're going to totally blow up and be really outraged because you feel like it's okay for you to have sex with me without a condom, but it's therefore not okay for me to have sex with other people without a condom. It's like, it's how we respond to getting sexually transmitted infections and how quickly we treat them and how quickly we inform our other partners. That's how we're actually being responsible. There's ways to be responsible and be sexually healthy while still having STIs, whether they're HIV, HSV, or even gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, the rest of them. There's ways to be responsible around that, and actually, I would think be sexually healthy. I would love for us to like actually unpack the idea of being sexually healthy too, because I feel like that's a really—
You think sexually healthy, like you're talking about being mentally, spiritually, sexually healthy, which is what the Goddess channel is focused on, which is what
Absolutely.
we're actually really thinking about. Why is this Tantra? Why is it even relevant? It's because I'm always working on the mind, body, spirit connection, and that keeping yourself healthy. And, you know, and I always wondered, you know, like I haven't gotten any outbreaks in the last 3 months, but, you know, it's never predictable if my life is stressful or if it's not stressful. A lot of things happen in our bodies that we don't quite have the answers to. But
come up unexpectedly.
Yeah. You're like, everything's going smoothly, but I just shat in my pants.
I don't know where you're getting this story from.
I just shat all over the toilet seat and I missed it completely. Yeah, so I made the decision. My heart is having palpitations. I don't understand why, because I spend work, you know, sharing my heart and doing love work. And so I don't understand why my heart is going, what's happening? Look, pay attention to me. So let's talk about emotional connections to how, so since we're talking about the mental health, it's like your feelings get involved in this. When people are prejudiced towards you, or they say shitty things, or their stigma comes out, their ignorance comes out, our feelings get hurt. Does that, do the feelings ever hurt less as you have been out and having sex with your status? Does it ever get easier? Can you talk a little bit about your emotional connection to people's reactions?
For sure. That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have been really comfortable being out. I thankfully was already doing HIV-related work when I found out about my status, and I basically had a really good idea that I was going to test positive before I did, so it wasn't a surprise. And I came out in a context of having a lot of other people that have been living with HIV for a lot longer than I was when I found out my status. So I was very fortunate in kind of coming into a community of a lot of wise folks that were able to give me a lot of support. And that helped facilitate me coming out really publicly about my status really early on. And learned a lot from these folks about how to navigate the world of people that didn't share the same kind of like biomarker around having HIV that I did, in terms of navigating sexual space, in terms of navigating like homosocial space and other kinds of social spaces. One of the things that I learned really early on was that it was really beneficial for me in terms of building connections with people to come out about my status as soon as I could. I was quite comfortable being public and being known around having HIV. So that made it easier for me to come out about my status quickly, even before I developed emotional connections with people. Because
can I just interrupt you really quick? Because I said, even though I'm like a spokesperson about it, I have YouTube videos about it, you're not always going to be like, hi, my name's Mariko, I have herpes. You know, you don't want to be doing that. So if I don't get to it and we've already started like sexual interaction, I may or may not feel strong enough at that very moment to stop everybody and say, look, I have herpes. Can we talk about this right now? Sometimes I don't.
Yeah, I don't. I also don't think that's a bad thing. I guess I should say that I'm talking about like kind of the time in my life when I first found out that I was HIV positive. I felt like it was a really important thing for me at that time to be really public about it. And now it's become a part of my like kind of public identity. But I also think that this is private health information. And now that I know you know, like I know more than most, like the general population about HIV transmission. And I know that you know, like I know that if I take my medication regularly, I have a, you know, like slim to zero chance of onward transmission of HIV. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a thing. You know, like in Canada, there's like legal requirements. If I'm not going to disclose that I am HIV positive, I need to wear a condom and have a suppressed viral load or a suppressed amount of virus in my system, which I have, and I can easily wear a condom. And then I don't have a legal requirement to disclose. And I also feel like the ethical requirement to disclose is a little bit of like a false dichotomy, or like this false like pretense, where there's a lot of things that people don't disclose when they get into relationships. Like, I'm not necessarily going to tell you that I have 3 dependent children, you know, that I'm like paying child support for, or I'm not going to tell you that I have like a really complex mental health history, or I'm not going to tell you that, you know, like I'm $25,000 in debt, or like $250,000 in debt.
What do you
like,
think is important to disclose? Do you talk about polyamory? Do you talk about
well, I think like, you know, any of those 3 things that I said could be important for someone to disclose, but polyamory may be an important thing to disclose. I think it really depends on the individual and what they think is important. But it's about trying to feel that out and one of the things that I think we can do, or one of the things that I think we can encourage other people to do who are HSV and HIV negative, is to create welcoming environments. Like, this is one of the things that allows disclosure to work so much more smoothly, is if people bring up sexual and reproductive health into a conversation with a new partner or in their friend group. You know, if you talk about that, oh, I know someone who's HIV positive, and, you know, like they are, you know, like a really great babysitter, and they, you know, babysit my brother's kids all the time, or like, you know, like I know someone who, you know, like had a really hard time finding a partner because she talked about having herpes, and it was a really complex, you know, like thing, because people have a lot of stigma about it, and it's actually really bullshit. Like, these are conversations that we can have in our social networks and with our new partners as a way of building a safety, or like laying some groundwork for creating a safe space or safer space for folks to be able to disclose. When we get outraged about people not disclosing, or when negative people of a bunch of things, folks get outraged about people not disclosing, I want to put the question back to be like, well, like, what was the context that you were expecting that to happen? Like, what, you know, like, how did you build a space where that would be like reasonably expectable?
mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So like, we're just having a conversation over dinner, and you're going to bring that up, you know? Sorry.
Yeah, building a safe space is important. And so if you are creating a environment or a space in which this is transactional in nature, or you're not going to be able to see me as a whole being, then I may not disclose all of my whole being to you.
Absolutely. And
then I will just, you know, use a condom.
Yeah. And then, like, you know, I'm interacting with you as a part of myself and not my whole self. And I may want to show my whole self to you, but, you know, like, I'm also not going to give you my, in Canada, we call it like a social insurance number. It's like the number you use to, you know, like to get a job or whatever. I'm not going to give you the PIN number for my bank card on my first date. Like, there's a lot of private information that's going to take some time for me to trust you. But also, what are you doing? So what I do is I try and build like safer spaces to disclose complex issues that are maybe not HIV related, but maybe sexual health related, maybe reproductive health related, maybe mental health related, maybe about substance use. So thinking about like, how do we create those spaces? I'm doing that work, or I try to do that work with new partners and new people in my life. How are you doing that work, you know, to allow for this disclosure to happen as well?
This is the first Goddess Channel Kaya Kuan Yin event that I've put herpes in the title of a webinar. So using Google Hangouts is an assured way for you to be Googleable under Kaya Kuan Yin and herpes. So just doing that and just being out, because I want people basically to watch this webinar, watch this video, and message me and come to me. People talk to me about it all the time. The more that you talk about it, the more out you are, I found, is the more healing. It becomes easier and easier to say it. And so I did pose that question to you: does it get easier over time? I would say that over time, I've pretty much been through every shitty situation that could possibly, there's always going to be new ones, but really, like, having been a sex and love worker, mostly a sex worker in this experience, or just having transactional sex, even hookup sex and things, people are not going to be the nicest to you, you know, at all times. A lot of people are just assholes. And so I've dealt with that, and I can able to, like, just laugh it off, because I'm really solid in where I stand at any given moment. And that's the beauty of, you know, having, I think, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is true a lot of the times when it comes to, you know, things like HIV or AIDS or, you know, things like that, man, you know, like, well, what are you afraid of? I already have it, you know, like, so, I mean, I don't want to get HIV or anything like that, but my, just my skin ironically got tougher when I started to have to advocate for myself on a constant basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's a bit twofold. Definitely, I feel like it's so much easier for me now that I have years of experience of disclosing my HIV status under my belt. But that's also been a really useful experience for helping me disclose, like, if I get another STI to my partners. It's like, I have this experience of rejection and this constant stream of rejection that's a part of my history. But also, you know, like, and as you well know, like, as an artist, you just get used to, you know, like 10 applications and maybe 1 acceptance, you know, and 9 rejections. So it's a thing that has been, that I've just acknowledged in my life, is that you don't always get what you want, but you need to keep asking and advocating for what you need. And then you'll sometimes get yeses. So it's been easier and easier over the course of, you know, like the last 8 years to be able to be frank about it. But I also recognize that it's situational, it's contextual, and it depends on, you know, like, if I, like, sometimes even if I feel like physically safe to do it, like, there's emotional safety, but then there's also sometimes physical safety is an issue. So, like, those things definitely play into it.
Physical safety meaning you feel your physical safety is threatened, or?
Yeah, definitely, especially because like, not all of the people that I hook up with or have sex with are sober. And there's a lot of HIV stigma out there. So sometimes I'm, you know, like, I've had experiences with people who get really angry to the point where it feels like the situation could become violent. And I feel like that is also more of a situation that a lot of folks that do sex work that I know who are HIV positive experience. It's really, really difficult to disclose your status as HIV positive and do sex work. For most of the folks that I know that are positive who do sex work, and because, you know, like, it's often small communities of people competing for a small number of clients. Sometimes other workers will out someone about their status and, like, contact, you know, folks that they know to be their clients and out them about their status, and that's a really shitty thing to do. And it also puts people's physical safety at risk.
What about just being an out positive sex worker?
Yeah,
do you know many people who do that?
I do. I actually know 3 or 4 people, and they are only really, as gay men, they're all gay men, and they're only really able to work in, like, San Francisco and New York and Toronto, Montreal, Chicago, Seattle, kind of like the bigger cities, where there's a large enough population of people living with HIV that they're able to kind of use that as, like, a niche market kind of tool. But they mostly have separate identities and separate accounts for their HIV positive sex work status, and then have other accounts where they don't disclose their status to have, you know, like, the negative population clients.
I was doing that as an escort, but I feel like since I'm doing Tantra life coaching, and a good 60 to 70% of my clients are not intercourse, or I may never have intercourse with my clients, and I don't exchange fluids with my clients. So I'm here to help facilitate healing and help people who have herpes, you know, with their sex lives and become more fuller and whole. So I don't feel like it's a risk for me to come out as being HSV positive. But there's always going to be clients who had no idea what Tantra was, has no idea what it is that I offer, and they just thought this was going to be like a happy ending massage or maybe even a full service intercourse date, which I totally don't do transactional sex work at all. I'm going to ask you about your spirituality, about your family, about your marriage, about your relationships, and we're going to work on how that's connected to your body. Like, everything is connected to your body. If you have one of these diseases, you can minimize your outbreaks by really just getting in control of your moods, your energies, you know. So the calmer that I've been around people's overreactions has helped them become calmer. Yeah. And just educating yourself and just understanding the stages that people all go through. Like, they're going to freak out in the beginning. Probably the first year is the hardest. For a lot of people, your outbreaks are more frequent, and you're getting used to yourself. You're like, I'm gonna have this for the rest of my life. Oh my God, you know, I'm never gonna fuck again. Did you get to see Mikiki, or is it Mikiki? Should I say Mikiki or
either?
What do you prefer? Did you see that rubber biker short suit? The scro. Did you see it?
No, I don't think I did.
Oh my God, what is it called? The scro wear. It's like rubber shorts with a penis hole in it. You didn't see it?
Oh, I think I've seen, this piece of gear. Yeah, I've seen it before.
You have?
Yeah.
So this person has herpes, and he contracted it from someone from the thighs, non-genital. It's called the scro guard. So he puts his condom penis through the hole, and then he covers his thighs. And he has intercourse that way. And that is really, I mean, I'm really grateful that he emailed me that, because I just got a total kick out of how some people, they really retain this, like, it's my responsibility to not infect my partner.
Yeah.
And they hold that very true. And I just, you know, have had to go the opposite direction, just out of my personal, that seems to be, and it seems like you and I kind of feel similarly in that way. Yeah. Or do you feel like, you know, this person is like, it's my responsibility to keep my partner safe. And I said, well, what if she told you, I'm okay with it, you know? Then would you do it, you know?
And what was their response?
He said that eventually that they would have unprotected sex, but for now, this is what he's doing. Yeah. And I feel that it's mostly him, you know, like, it's his concern and his burden that he's holding at this moment. And sometimes people process it like that. It's like, oh, you know, you might tell your lover that they should, well, you're on medication, so your lover doesn't need to be on PrEP. That's what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm. It's true. But I was living with HIV and not being on medication for like a good 6 years. So I also felt like it was, you know, I took it to be my responsibility to not transmit HIV, but I would, you know, like, I had a bunch of different strategies that I would use to prevent HIV transmission, whether it was like sleeping with people that I knew to be living with HIV, or to use condoms with people who I didn't know their status or they were negative, or to, like, there's also a bunch of like harm reduction strategies that have like are less effective than the kind of like use a condom or be on medication are kind of like the top level. Sleep with only positive people obviously is not going to be transmitting HIV for other positive people. But then there's also some more harm reduction measures, which are not necessarily as effective as the kind of like 95 to 98% that we're normally used to with like condoms and effective HIV treatment. But things like the positive partner being the receptive or bottom in a situation is a lower risk of transmission. You know, like things like
pulling out, right? You guys have withdrawal as well.
Yeah, totally. And like using lots of lube, and, you know, like there's a bunch of different ways that people can apply some harm reduction strategies to the sex that they're having, even though it's not going to necessarily mitigate the risk to the same degree that other like more like commonly accepted strategies will. It's, you know, it's actually still a tool, and it's important to be acknowledged as such. So let people make their own decisions about their bodies. That's kind of like my my MO.
Did you guys make that decision together, or what? You're like, okay, I'm positive, I'm going to be the top. Or does that person say, no, I can't have you be the top because I'm the top? Then what? Then you have to make it together is what I'm saying, you know? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, I feel like any decision about like sexual pleasure has to be made together for sure.
What is the worst thing that you would like to share that has happened regarding people being assholes?
I have two, actually. So one was, I am from the East Coast of Canada, and I went home recently to visit my best friend and my goddaughter. And I went to help my best friend's partner install an art show that she was putting up in a small town in the East Coast of Canada. And I met this guy, and we had a great time getting to know each other, like on like a chat site. And he wanted us to have sex, and he wanted us to have condomless sex, even though he was negative. And I told him, you know, I kind of like did my educator spiel, and I was like, okay, so like these are the, you know, like these are the risks and these are not the risks and whatever. And he was like, yeah, I fully understand, everything's fine. And then he came to Toronto, the city I live in now, a couple of weeks afterwards to see other friends, but also was really interested in us meeting up and having sex again, and for us to go further and like have more fluid bonding sex. And yeah, and anyway, there was a miscommunication, and we didn't end up hooking up on a night that he wanted to hook up, and he felt really hurt. I would say butt hurt is kind of like, even though he wasn't actually butt hurt in the situation, but like butt hurt is the best phrase I know for it. So then started just like throwing all of this really negative language at me, and he was like, you know, like, how dare you reject me? You know, like, you're lucky I would even sleep with you because you're dying of AIDS and blah, blah, blah. So that was a really awful, you know, I mean, like, obviously we have that kind of, you know, somewhat regularly as people living with HIV. We kind of get handed this shit when people are feeling scared or in pain or whatever. And it was a really unpleasant experience, and I was really frustrated and hurt by it. But I also tried to recognize that this person was coming from a place of hurt themselves, and that their experience or that their interaction with me was kind of motivated by ignorance as well as pain. But I definitely tore him a new asshole when I talked to him via text the next day. I was like, this is not okay. You're lucky that I'm texting you back. I should have actually deleted your number and blocked you, because I don't get talked to like that. No one deserves to be spoken to in such a disrespectful way. But because I am unfortunately trained to be an educator so much of the time, I was like, I'm actually just going to school you a little bit more and tell you, like, this is what happens when HIV stigma plays out, and these are some of the ways that you're enacting all of this, like, emotional and psychic violence on, you know, like, my physical person, but also my community. And like, these are some things that you need to actually check your head about if you want to have the sex that you claim that you want to have. You're like, you're going to be having sex with people living with HIV, and you can't be that selfish, and you can't be that self-absorbed and not think about the emotional impact of the interactions and the language that you're going to use. So that was a really
Was he begging you to infect him essentially, or he was just wanting to have condomless sex, not thinking that you would infect him? He was just aware of the fact that there was a low risk, or was he trying to be
I think he
seroconverted, whatever.
Yeah, he wanted to role play a seroconversion fetish, but he didn't actually, like, he knew that because I was undetectable that there would actually be no like legitimate risk for him to acquire HIV, but he wanted to like role play an HIV transmission scene.
But it's still a trigger for you, no doubt, to be called.
Totally. Yeah, the whole point is that I'm taking medication so I don't have to worry about the idea. This is one of the things too, when people like role play this HIV transmission or seroconversion scene, is like, essentially you want me to stop taking medication, and that means I'm going to get sick. So you want me to fetishize or to participate in your fetish of me becoming unwell, which, I'm sorry, but that's just not a turn on for me. I want to stay healthy, and being healthy is actually a turn on for me, you know?
Totally.
Yeah. So it was complex because, you know, it's like I recognize that, you know, like, our desire is constructed through the media that we consume and through the communities that we live in and whatever. I wanted to be respectful of, you know, like, the place that he was coming from, but also try and bring a little bit of humanity to, you know, like, I was essentially playing like a Nicole Kidman style cardboard cutout of an HIV positive person for him. And I was like, you know, that's actually does a disservice to me and to all of the other HIV positive people that you may or may not know, that probably aren't coming out to you about their status because you see us as this one-dimensional like vector of disease, as opposed to like fully formed humans that like, you know, cut your grass or shovel your driveway or watch your kids, or, you know, like he was actually an elementary school teacher. I was like, you know, like there's a lot of us that are also like I went to the beach today with a bunch of elementary school teachers who are living with HIV, you know, like just.
Yeah, I imagine it's so common, you know, like 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10. Or...
Well, in Toronto, they actually say that it's like 1 out of 4 gay men are living with HIV.
Wow,
so like,
1 out of 4 is quite high, higher than San Francisco then.
Yeah, it's quite significant in Toronto. Yeah, so that's the reality. So like, you really need to be a little bit more aware of the language that you use, because 1 out of 5 people, or 1 out of 4 people at this table, aside from me, like 1 out of 4 people at this table, you're going to be alienating with this really shitty language.
And it's no fun to participate in a role play that you don't like.
Also true.
Just refuse to do that, period. It's like a good BDSM self-care thing. Don't do things that you don't like.
Yeah.
I try not to do things that I don't like.
Yeah.
I dominate. I'm dominating right now. This is what I look like. I don't wear outfits that are uncomfortable. I totally am myself at all times.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I take care of myself. And I'm all about the internal energy around it. And really, like, the calmer that you are and the more just comfortable and grounded in your body that you learn to be as you as the days, months of forever pass that you will have this disease, it becomes so much easier to digest in yourself. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, yeah, herpes is, everybody has that. It's 1 in 4 for herpes. I didn't know that for HIV, it was 1 in 4. That's quite high.
Yeah.
But I do know like a sex worker who is all about wearing PrEP t-shirts, takes PrEP, like PrEP is the solution, you know, like a daily prescription, and is all about it. So, and then people like you are like, you know, this is the way that I do it, condomless sex with only positive people. And I will tell you that because I've had herpes for 5 years, this last primary partner was the very first time I'd ever fluid bonded. I didn't even know what that felt like. It was really amazing to have that kind of relationship. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot about what happens to semen when it explodes in your butthole. I learned that what goes up must come down, Mikiki. I'm sure you knew that.
Yeah. There's also a very particular smell to when semen comes out of a butthole. I'm just going to say, it's like.
I was like, wow, that feels like another piece of shit, but then nothing came out in the toilet. It was like a nothing. And I was like, what was that? And I was like, oh, that's that load. That load that never, it doesn't, your butt doesn't swallow. That's something that I learned. It doesn't go anywhere. It comes up and then it goes back down.
Exactly. That's hilarious.
That's like my funniest story about that.
Great story.
But what I do commend my last partner about is just really be willing to just go there with me. And like, that's how we really connected from the very beginning. It's like, he was about to go down on me and I was like, I have herpes and it shows up in my genitals. So you can make a decision on whether you want to continue to give me, you know, oral pleasure, or if you don't want to at all, or you need dental dam or something like that, you know, I'm willing to accommodate you. But honestly, in all honesty, if people want to use dental dams with me for a long time, it's not going to usually work for me. Yeah. I'd rather be with someone who is willing to take that chance. You always want to be with someone who's reflecting you. So someone who is going to show up in bed with the biker short, with the rubber biker shorts, they're not going to be my lover. You know, like I didn't even want to date only positive singles. I don't think it's necessary. I am not defined by my work. I'm not defined by my my monogamy, non-polyamory, my Gemini status, my nothing, you know, like I am totally unique. I have elements about me that are common of certain communities and groups, but I don't want to just date positive people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a thing that has taken some getting used to on my part as well, is like realizing that, you know, like similar to HSV, there's ways that we know how to prevent transmission, and that's the same thing for HIV. There's, you know, like, but because of the stigma associated with it, I was like, oh, when I first found out, I was like, oh, well, I will just only have relationships with other HIV positive people. And thankfully I lived, you know, like in Montreal and now in Toronto in like large urban settings with like a very like dense gay neighborhoods and lots of people living with HIV. So I felt like I wasn't actually realistically cutting down my dating pool so much, even though it was taking like 3/4 of the potential partners out of the dating pool. but now it's in the last couple of years where I've really let this information around around prevention and like some of the new technologies, new scientific biomedical interventions around prevention kind of seep into my consciousness. I have found myself more willing to have like emotional connections with HIV negative people, and it's been a really eye-opening experience for me, and really humbling as well to recognize that I had cut off the potential to connect emotionally with people just based on a biomedical marker, and that's in some ways like as I wouldn't say as stigmatizing, but I feel like it's not useful for me to reduce the potential of someone being a partner to like a status as positive or negative.
And times are changing. People who are negative are not as afraid in the gay community. I think that herpes has not really lost its stigma for a lot of people in the hetero community or the non-queer community. I feel like people are just as afraid as ever. And then other people, the more people that come out, I mean, I think that it's important, you know. I feel like just setting that example, and I experimented with it all the time, but I will be the first to tell you on YouTube broadcasts that I don't always talk about it, even if I'm in bed with people. It's really situational. It's based on if I feel strong. And I feel strong in my body right now, but I'm not fucking you, you know? I'm not drunk or high, you know, like you know, like I'm not a Burning Man, you know, like if I feel like, you know, but most of the time it becomes very easy, like I said.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that you're doing is that you're creating this sense of community for people. And for people living with HSV, it's a really difficult thing to find community unless it's specifically looking for like other HSV positive people for hookups. Or
I'm
like
not even in a HSV community necessarily. I'm just, because I've been so out, I'm aware of which ones of my friends have herpes. And I just posted it on their private message. I didn't post it on their walls or anything. And just because you go to this webinar doesn't mean that you have any of these things, you know. It's like you're interested in it. But yeah, I think I set the example. I could definitely talk about this topic. I kept it in the closet for a year, and then, you know, as a worker, I felt like it was going to hurt my income, so I didn't want to disclose. I would never disclose as a worker. And I never transmitted, it never came back to me through text message or phone call, oh, you gave this to me. And I had a lot, you know, a good number of sexual partners as an escort. So that I was my own case study, I believe, but I could just be a unique example. I tend to feel that I'm not as contagious based on that study that I did of my own sex life. And we are our own experts at our own bodies, right? So I can only tell you what's worked for me. And my next lover, I'm like, this is the situation with me. You know, usually, like I said, it's easier. But I'll tell you my worst recent situation. A client booked me for 3 hours, and then he had to go to the ATM. Sometimes I trust people nowadays to pay me afterwards because I have a different, like, kind of higher intelligence, higher emotional level clientele now that I do Tantra. But not everybody, right? So he was going to go to the ATM to pay afterwards. And then once I started to casually talk about that I have herpes, then he decided that he wanted to cut the date short and therefore not pay for the 3 hours that he had promised, but now it's going to be this 1 hour. And I said, no, you had verbally agreed to to do it for this much time. This is what you're contracted and bound to. You don't get to leap out of bed and you know, basically cut off this contract because now you're afraid of me. You're afraid of sharing intimacy with me. So I'm here to tell you that I'm going to hold you to that contract. There's so many different ways that we can spend this time together intimately, safely, you know, respectfully, mutually, you know, in love with each other. And I'm just going to hold you to that. I'm not going to give you a refund because you're scared. I'm here to hold your fear and work you through it. But I don't feel like it's necessary for you to get a refund. And I held to that, you know, like you really have to do that all the time and just know where your compass is and just be like, nope, this is what my body is worth. This is what my self-esteem is worth. This is what my self-esteem has to do with what I think of myself. So that means that no matter what other people are trying to give you to hold, that you can just give it back to them.
Absolutely.
And you get better at that. And just being a worker of any kind, like my body is my business. Like I become an expert at that. And so I held him to it. I said, look, I've been out about having herpes for a long time. I've also been out in the sex industry for a really long time. So if you do not pay me what the original contract amount is, me and my then boyfriend, who's a performance artist as well, we are going to dress up in gold and sit on your balcony, you know, until you pay me, you know, basically. Like, that's how crazy I feel. You know, that's how I don't know, you know, you just, part of me is like, I'm so offended that you even would do that, that I'm getting a little belligerent, and I'm not acting in the light and love that I should. And this is a confession. It's not like the best example, because I'm definitely showing a little bit like hustler bitchy side. And I'm trying to make money here. This is the Goddess channel. I'm trying to get private clients from the viewers.
Absolutely.
But sometimes you got to get a little like, you know, gangster on people. You know, people are just going to like try and run you over and make it your fault at all times, and put the burden on you at all times. And I'm here to tell you that it's 50% you and 50% the other person.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really great thing for us to kind of focus on as well, is this idea that other people are somehow responsible for managing our sexual health. And I'm going to get into a sexual situation with someone, and whether I, you know, like, expect that they know their status, or I expect that they're going to tell me their status, that they feel comfortable to do that, but that regardless of someone else's status, I should be willing to go into the situation and know what activities, what behaviors, and what risks are associated with those that I'm willing to take or not willing to take. I feel like that's one of the things that really draws a connection between HIV and HSV, is about this idea of personal responsibility and shared responsibility. Yes, it's great to be like an activist and want to, you know, like, safeguard our partners from acquiring HSV or HIV, but that also, like, one of the things that helps us do that is a safer space for us to be able to disclose, and we don't have that right now. So there's ways that you and I and folks in our communities can help to build that, but it also requires our partners and folks in the negative communities to take a little bit more responsibility for their sexual health, but also for creating spaces that are more hospitable to having conversations about stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I just have this very, like, I guess, hard line around the way that I feel around it. So I guess that part of me comes out. It's in a negative light, because that, you know, you're only reflecting what's given to you a lot of the time, but it's often our job to be like, okay, this person's acting out of ignorance. I should just walk away from this. I can choose to educate this person and spend 30 minutes on the phone doing that, or I can walk away.
Yeah.
Or, you know, do I feel like it today, or do I not? Or do I just want to, like, get on the phone with another friend, or play the guitar and sing, or, you know, like,
I think that's so legit. Like, I have a friend who I used to live with, this amazing trans woman, and she had a conversation with me around the similarities between being trans and being HIV positive, and she's like, sometimes, or people just expect you, once they know your identity as being either HIV positive or trans, then they expect that you are going to be an educator, and that you're always going to be on and available for that. And that's actually, you know, like, that's something that people get paid for. Like, that's like labor that you're performing, so that we would expect people to do that because we just have an expectation that this is, you know, like, this is something that I deserve, as opposed to, this is something I should, you know, like, it's a concern in my life. It's an issue that's coming up in my life. It's something that I should, like, if I'm going to be engaging with someone sexually, I should be aware of it. If I'm a human in the world, I should know about trans issues. You know, like, these are things that that are parts of our communities. So get to know them, and don't expect your partners or people in your lives to be the educators all the time. You know,
yeah, a lot of the time I just let it go, and then I just kind of, you know, but I want, you know, for other people who have something to look at this YouTube video and be like, oh, wow, that's what herpes looks like, or that's what HIV positive people look like, and that, just to be in your total confidence, and that it's never a perfect package. You have good days and bad days. You have days in which you're like, you know, shitting all over yourself, and sometimes you're, okay, so just in, like, I have, you know, not shitting all over myself days, but I definitely have urine incontinence issues, which I don't always share with people. But
Yeah.
that's definitely like something that happens to me when I laugh. I have like incontinence issues. I'm like,
Yeah.
and
also just so folks know, the running joke that we're making is that I actually like didn't make it to the toilet today, because one of the things that happens with people living with HIV and taking medication is that, you know, sometimes we have gastrointestinal issues, and yeah, so I had a little bit of a cleanup to do, which made me late to meet the goddess for a pre-hangout chat.
So then do you tell people that you're on medication and that you're HIV, or you just probably need to just tell them that one thing, I'm on medication? And so then that would tell a negative person, oh, this person is safer in a way. Is that like a way of disclosing?
That has become a thing that, at least in Toronto, it's become a little bit more common knowledge that if someone says undetectable, most people know what it means. And if they don't know what it means, if they do know what it means, then you don't have to talk any further. But if they don't know what it means, then you explain that then you get to, you know, get to or are forced to do the conversation about HIV positive but on medication. Undetectable means lower amount of virus present in the body, less likelihood to transmit.
So you would say I'm undetectable?
Yeah. I normally would say positive and undetectable, because I feel like it's important for me to assert my identity as a person living with HIV who's not ashamed to talk about it.
And you do tell that to people, like even if you meet them at a bathhouse or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. There have, you know, in the past been some contexts where it's happened after the fact, where it's like there's, you know, like assumptions being made about like I met you at a sex party, or I met you like in this context. And if we're going to have sex like this, then I'm just assuming that you're HIV positive as well. But I have had conversations with folks about it afterwards. It's like, oh yeah, I was HIV positive too. That's why I assumed that we were doing what we were doing.
Because nothing can happen if you sleep with another positive person?
Well, definitely there's other STIs present for sure, or other STIs that are, if they're present, they're a possibility. But this is another good piece for us to kind of touch on as well, is this idea that exposure equals transmission, and it's not actually the case. So people can be exposed to herpes, people can be exposed to HIV, you can be exposed to syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, any of the STIs. It doesn't mean that exposure equals 100% guaranteed transmission.
Totally. Thank you. That's
the thing that's a big fear for a lot of people, is like, oh, someone has HIV, someone has herpes. If I, you know, get near them, I'm going to get it. And that's actually totally false. And
I could have a cold sore on my mouth and I could kiss you and you could not get it.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
I could have no cold sore on my mouth and you could get it. You know?
Yeah.
It's really hard to understand, and I've just come to terms to accept that it's sporadic and it's as unpredictable as catching a cold. You know, you want to do your best to stay away from someone who has a cold, right? So you cover your mouth. You ask that person to cover their mouth. You don't make out with that person. Those are preventions that probably both of us make in our sex lives.
Totally. But and if I feel like if I feel like a burning sensation in my urethra and I'm concerned that I might have an STI and I haven't been able to get checked, then it's like I'm probably going to avoid, you know, like if we're going to have sex, then I'm probably going to avoid like genital play that involves my urethra or my dick. So like there's ways that, you know, like there's also lots of things that people can do. Like you may have an outbreak on your mouth and your genitals are not having an outbreak, so your genitals are fair game. You know, like there's lots of things that people can do, but we don't tend to think of it that way. We think of like, oh, someone has this thing and therefore they are this thing, as opposed to these are the ways that this specific infection or disease are transmitted. And these
a lot of the way that herpes is published about is you're always contagious. And so therefore, companies like Scrogard, who are making these biker short products that cover your thighs and have a little hole for your penis, are making a killing off of this fear that you're always contagious. You're going to have something. You always have to, any contact, I need to wear a full body condom and gloves and this biker short thing with just a hole with my dick, you know? Whereas I'm like, to me, I refuse to, even have sex that way.
Yeah. Well, if that was the case, then everyone would be HSV positive. It's like the same kind of fear mongering that happened around everyone needs to use a condom for oral sex to prevent HIV. And it's like, if HIV was transmitted predominantly or like equally through oral sex as it is through anal or vaginal sex, then everyone would be HIV positive. Like, I'm sorry, like that the science just doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, so there's just different people's reactions to different things. Like, this person shared with me the scroll guard that he's wearing to have sex, and my partner, when I first had sex with him, I said, look, I have herpes, and he totally went down on me right there, and that was our first date, so some people, like, they're like, I don't care, I'm willing to do it. And
good date.
So let's end with like a positive note, because we're almost at a little bit over an hour, but just what's the best thing that kind of the best heartwarming sort of reaction that you've had from someone that you've told that you were positive?
Well, I guess like some of the most heartwarming responses are just when other people are like, oh, thanks, I didn't know how to disclose that I'm positive too. But, like when people are surprised and feel comfortable and safe to be able to disclose their status as positive as well, that's definitely a thing. Also, I guess some of the, like, these are things that kind of happen not often, but with enough regularity that I can't say it's just like a one-off. But when people, when I disclose to people and then we have a conversation about it and then they say, oh, thank you, like, I didn't know that information about transmission, and now I feel better informed to be able to make, like, smarter decisions and to not exclude HIV positive people from my sex life.
I feel like when I met my last partner, when I did tell him, look, I have herpes and you can make a choice as to whether to continue or not, and this person just like, I don't care, I'm going to give you pleasure. Mm-hmm. That to me, it just feels like pure love. Like, for me, I have to, like, at that moment, that was an additional thing that made me fall in love with him. It was just like, wow, and then having to have experienced this fluid bond and this connection that I'd never felt with anybody was like phenomenal, So when you're really being seen as whole and not as a disease, that has such a healing effect that, continues to radiate throughout your being when you're out of the bedroom after you break up with someone. That's still with me in my heart right now. And I strive for that as a minimum requirement, that someone sees me as whole in all senses of who I am and doesn't try to take one fragment of my being and live in that fragment.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, so we've long broken up, but I still really appreciate that about that partner. And it's out there. It's not just him. There's many people who are like, okay, you're positive with this, I get it. I'm willing to take responsibility for my own health by doing this, this, and this. Let's fuck. Like, and it's just like, great, awesome.
Totally. Yeah.
See me, great, okay. Wow. Doesn't that feel great, right, Mikiki? Right? You're like, yes, absolutely. Let's get naked in the hot tub. Awesome. Totally. That is like the best feeling. And then you just, like, your heart opens and your legs open and you're just having this great, that's when you can have this heart genital connection. It's when you have to guard yourself for mental and physical safety that it changes everything. And so I had made that transition from, having that kind of closed off, protective, energetically protective transactional sex as an escort to being a goddess. And I opened my heart, I opened my legs, to people. And it's a very different sacred aspect, which has made me whole. I set the bar much higher now, and of course, I forever support my sex working brothers and sisters. But over time, I think that just living that way is not really a sustainable way to support your mental well-being. That really seeing your partners as whole, seeing yourself as whole, is very important for your longevity, and you want to have longevity.
Well, yeah.
So then, last words that you want to say, basically, those are good last words, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it can be really difficult for workers, for like sex workers who are doing kind of like more normative sex work, to be able to find sustainability in it. But I also want to acknowledge that I feel like there are also workers that I know that are able to find a wholeness in themselves in the work as well. I also just feel like I'm so thankful to you for bringing this channel, and also for like bringing a space for folks to talk about HSV specifically, and also for making a space for us to draw some connections and analogies, because there's a lot of energy happening in HIV, in the HIV response and in HIV activism. And I feel like one of the best lessons and gifts that I've had from being HIV positive and doing this work is just around the importance of community and around connection and around narrative. And it's important for us to speak our truth and to talk about what's happened to us and how we're feeling about it. And building community makes us stronger as individuals and together. So
like I said, I've learned a ton from you. Like when you told me that you were having unprotected sex and you were positive, that was like jaw dropper for me, you know? And I was like, wow. Yeah. And these people are tripping because I have herpes and I won't tell them. That's crazy.
Right? Yeah.
I don't even have something that can kill you, and you are leaping out of bed and wiping yourself off with toilet paper. Yeah. I don't understand that. You know, like there are people who are really just germ phobic. So anything, cold, herpes, HIV is like, oh my God, you're dead. You might as well kill yourself now. You know, everybody's going to react differently, and just to try and find that middle ground for sanity is like everybody's job, you know, like don't trip. It's okay. Don't trip. Mm-hmm. Don't let these, pictures on the internet determine how you react. Yeah. Find your own reaction and talk to your own people.
And recognize that like contracting HIV and contracting herpes are like actually a really regular thing that happens in people's lives. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have the 1 in 4 statistic in Toronto, which is another thing a little tidbit that I learned today. But I always say the 1 in 4 statistic for herpes because it's so common. 1 in 4 is 25%. It's very common. So don't give me any shit. Everybody has it.
Exactly.
Everybody has something. If it's not oral genital or HIV. And I'm really happy to know that there's a lot of different options for people who are positive. I have a positive friend who's a master controller who is undetectable, doesn't need to be on medication at all. And there's many different ways to do sex work is what I want to elicit as advice if there's anybody watching this, that I've transitioned into doing a different form of love work, a different form of sexual exchange. And there's just different ways you can do this for money or not. You could just change the way you view sexuality. It's never the end of your sex life. The way you view the problem is the problem. And that's my last thought about that. So thank you so much. Continue to love and care for you from Los Angeles, California. I love what you're doing as an artist. I love what you're doing as an individual. I'm glad that we're still in each other's lives.
Very much, I'm so thankful for the invitation. I'm so thankful that you're doing this work. It's very important, and you're really good at it.
Yeah, post this. I'll post it on your wall and share it again, and we'll do another project soon, hopefully artistic, or I'll make my way up to Toronto in the future.
Sounds marvelous.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
You as well.